Hello and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where this week we don't have a clever intro because I don't speak Korean, I'm sorry.
Wait, really?
No, yeah, it's not a part of my skills,
So
unfortunately.
you lied on your resume to get on this podcast.
I did, yeah, no, I've put several languages on my resume that are just not true. I just speak English and Italian, unfortunately. So this week we are, I guess we can say we're hitting the bong.
Yeah.
That's a good start. So we're talking about Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder this week. But before we do that, let's introduce our co-host. I'm Hugo, and as usual with me are Jeff Grizz.
Hello.
And Josh Bradley.
Howdy.
How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Pretty good, man. How you doing?
Super busy week.
Yeah, it was a long week. It was a long week, but we got through it, you know?
We made it.
Yeah.
We made it to Spider-Man, gang. We made it.
As did literally everyone else.
Everyone.
So.
As we're recording this, Spider-Man just had its third biggest worldwide opening weekend of any movie ever, I think.
Of all time,
Yeah. They did all right.
Yeah.
It did fine. Yeah.
Movies are
Every
dying,
other movie
it's okay.
made like 1
Yeah.
million.
Movies are dying, that's fine. Spider-Man's cool.
Spider-Man's cool.
Good movie, though. We'll talk about it. So, yeah, before we get into Memories of Murder, speaking of Spider-Man, what have we been watching this week? Or the last few weeks, I guess, because we haven't recorded for a while. I'll start with Josh, because he said he went to a bunch of movies, didn't he?
Start with me. Yeah. Okay, so we recorded Sweeney Todd on December 5th. It is currently, December 19th? Is that right?
Yep.
To date ourselves. So the last 2 weeks, I've watched some Christmas movies. I watched Home Alone. I watched Elf. I watched The Santa Claus. Just 3 bangers. I mentioned on our previous recording that I watched Jingle All the Way. Not a banger. Those 3, Home Alone, Elf, and Santa Claus, bangers. I watched The Power of the Dog, which is probably going to win Best Picture, I imagine.
Really?
It's on Netflix. You should watch it. Yeah, I think so. Certainly, I predict it's going to win Best Director for Jane Campion, but it's also among the 3 or 4 movies that has a shot at Best Picture right now. Really good movie. I saw Licorice Pizza, guys. Finally, I've actually seen it twice as of this recording, and I'll probably see it a third time before we're talking
jealous
again.
at all.
It's really good. Actually, there's a bit in Licorice Pizza, not to spoil anything, but there's a bit where Alana lies about how many languages she knows, and that's why I was laughing when you were saying that you know all these languages, Hugo. She's like listening to languages and just keeps going and is lying about all of them, but it's really funny. I saw a movie called Red Rocket. Mm-hmm. That was really, really good. It's a movie from Sean Baker, the guy who did the Florida Project a few years ago. It's his latest, and it's outstanding. It actually, just yesterday, the LA Film Critics announced their end of season awards. They gave Simon Rex Best Actor for Red Rocket. Good movie. If it plays in your city, go see it. I finally finished King Richard. Good movie. And then on Friday, I very stupidly went to a theater on the Friday night of Spider-Man's opening weekend. And I was there to see West Side Story, but I damn near missed it because parking was so freaking hard to find because everyone in Los Angeles was at the Burbank 16 to see Spider-Man, I guess. But, my West Side Story screening had 20, 30 people in it, which is pretty good, all things considered.
Yeah,
but
that's decent.
Yeah, West Side Story was excellent, by the way. Really, really good. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
I
Steven
intend to
Spielberg
see that
can make a
this
movie.
week.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm looking forward to it despite not being into musical, just because it's Spielberg. But it's releasing, I think, next week here.
You didn't care much for the original, right? Is that right?
I
didn't
didn't even watch the original, to be honest. So,
But, okay, I'm thinking of Sweeney Todd is what you didn't like because of the musical element.
Yeah. So, but I think I'm going to go see it just because it's Spielberg. And, I mean, I've liked almost everything I've seen from him, so I might as well. Also, I want to support it as well.
Probably, that's a good call.
Grizz, what about you? What have you got?
So, since we last recorded, I watched Red Notice, which is an action movie.
What's that?
That's Dwayne
Do you
The
say,
Rock
what's
Johnson.
that?
Dwayne The Rock
I have
Johnson,
no idea what that is.
Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot on,
okay.
in an action movie. It's a heist thing.
This is released in theaters?
No, it's a Netflix movie, Hugo.
Oh,
and
okay, that's why I don't know. Yeah.
The cynical among us may say that it's an algorithm made Netflix movie, made from the algorithm. And
written by an AI.
Well, no, it was written by Rawson Marshall Thurber, who's actually a good filmmaker. He made Dodgeball, among other things. I like him, but I was surprised you haven't heard of it. It's like saying you haven't heard of Spider-Man Far From Home, or Netflix would have us believe.
I don't know if that's true. I really don't pay attention to Netflix movies that much.
Heavily advertised. Red Notice.
Yeah, Netflix has been making the rounds saying it's like the most watched thing on their service ever, and like they can make that claim, but also they don't release any kind of data ever. So everything they put out is the most watched thing.
They've made that claim several times this year.
But they're really pushing it on Red Notice, and I don't know anyone who's watched Red. You're the first person I've talked to who's watched Red Notice.
It was fine. I mean, if you like Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds, and if you like The Rock being The Rock, then yeah, it's the movie for you.
My brother's definitely seen this. Probably he loves The Rock.
I also watched The Harder They Fall on Netflix. You know, the Western. Which was very, very fun. Belfast, I saw that. And again, I enjoyed that a lot. And then I went and watched some classics like Rush Hour and Die Hard. You know, I had to get a Christmas movie in there, so I watched Die Hard. And then I finally watched Bo Burnham Inside.
You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing okay now. I've recovered. It's like I told you guys that I didn't watch it when everyone was talking about it all the time because it had been so hyped up. I wanted to give it a fair shot of living up to that hype, so I needed to distance myself a little from it. So I did, and now I finally watched it. And it wasn't worth waiting. It would have been perfect the first time if I just watched it when you guys did.
Like, for me, it's still probably my favorite thing that's been released this year.
A couple things, actually.
It's powerful.
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, I just wanted to say that I had Bo Burnham as my number 2 on my Spotify Wrapped, so that's where I've been at mentally, listening to that Inside album over and over again. And number 2, what'd you think of Belfast? Like, tell me more about this.
So, have either of you guys seen Belfast yet?
I have seen it.
Okay.
It hasn't released yet, so.
I thought it was very, very good. There are aspects of it that just fell a little short. Otherwise, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I was very close to giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars because it's a very emotionally resonant story. Very beautifully shot. I love the black and white, although I don't think like the black and white looks good, but that one of the reasons it didn't resonate perfectly with me is because the movie takes place in a time period where, you know, things weren't in black and white on TV, so that felt a little weird, but it did offer one of my favorite things about the movie was that whenever they show something that's happening on the news or on a movie screen, that is shown in color. And I think that was to illustrate the escapism of the media when all these bad things are happening in Belfast. So I think that was the point of it. And so I did like that a lot, and there's some really great performances, but you know, there's some weird moments that
there's some really, really weird moments that are so out of place.
And like the climax, I'm not going to spoil it, but like there's a big climactic moment that is resolved by something that was set up in like a gag scene earlier in the movie. And I'm like, okay, come on, Mr. Branagh, what are you doing?
I think we both are. I'm more lukewarm on it than you are. Like I gave it 3.5 out of 5, but I was close to giving it 3. And on rewatch, I might give it 3. Yeah, I'm kind of going the other way. I think I'm more critical of it because it also is among the 3 or 4 movies that has a chance at Best Picture, I think, right now. So like, Power of the Dog is a much, 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 much better movie than Belfast, and I don't know. I think that I'm overly critical of when I hear that kind of thing. I guess, like for example, Green Book. Green Book's a fine movie, and had I seen that divorced of any kind of context of awards, I probably would have liked it just fine. But it's different when you're giving that movie Best Picture, you know, and that's kind of how I feel about Belfast. Like Belfast is a very nice movie, but it kind of, I think it's nice on the surface, but it kind of does not hold up to much scrutiny. Grizz, you kind of feel like we're alluding to that a little bit. Yeah. Like, you know, the visual style and even the story to an extent, like once you start to pull at it, it just unravels pretty quick. At least that's the kind of sense I was getting, but I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, I think its strong points are things that are more important to me, usually based on our conversations, than they are to you. Like the emotional resonance of something. I think I weight that a lot more than you do when looking at these sort of things. So for me, like a less quality movie I might enjoy it more because it hits those high notes. But yeah, you're right. There are, like, even within the narrative, there's some weird things that I'm like, oh, okay, that could have been better.
Hugo, what have you been watching?
Well, as I always say, nothing comes out here unless it's a giant movie. All the late season Oscar type movies come out in January and February. So I've been doing weird watches. I watched World on a Wire and The 13th Floor, which are two movies based on the same book, which is Simulacrum 3. And, one of the precursors of the idea of virtual reality and stuff. So obviously I've been watching movies in preparation to see The Matrix. I wanted to see some older movies. Like World on a Wire is this 1973. It was actually a two-part miniseries. It's a German miniseries. It's like 4 hours long now on Criterion it exists. And it's one of those things that if you're a fan of sci-fi, you should absolutely watch because it feels like a milestone, especially when you put it in the context of 1973 when it was made. It is very long. It is kind of slow and boring and incredibly German. But I think there's a lot to love there if you're interested in these types of ideas. It's essentially a story about this cybernetics firm that is making a virtual world, and they begin to question whether their world is virtual or not. The 13th Floor is basically a remake of it, and it's not very good. It's like it's this weird movie from 1999 that feels like it was released in 1985, and it just doesn't really work as well. Then I watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I'd never seen.
Great movie,
so good.
Fantastic movie. Hugo. Yeah, excellent film. I don't know. I don't even know what to say about it. The only thing that I didn't completely love was that I feel like there's a tonal shift at one point in the movie that feels a little jarring. And I read that Roger Ebert, for example, had the same idea initially in his first review, and then rewatching it, he said, "Oh, actually, it really works on a rewatch really well." Because I guess when you watch it the first time, it's difficult to know what to expect from it, and it starts out feeling, so joyous in some ways and comedic, and then it's much darker than you think. And I think watching it again, you realize how dark it was from the beginning.
Absolutely,
but
yeah,
just a fantastic movie.
I love Juicy Fruit.
Got it. It's so good. And then I watched The Matrix 1 in theaters because they re-released it, and that was incredible. Like I had an exam in the morning, and in the afternoon I just went to see The Matrix by myself in an empty theater, and it was everything you hope for that kind of thing. It was great. And then finally
Italians didn't show up for this.
Yeah, no, it was like a Monday afternoon. It was
what?
Yeah, nobody was there. Everyone was at work. So it was like me and one other person. It was great. And then I watched No Way Home twice because I watched it in English, and then I went to see it again with my little brother who didn't want to come to see it in English. So yeah.
And I did also watch that.
Good movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
I really liked
thoroughly
it,
as well.
I really liked it. Yeah, you want to be cynical about these things, but it's just really good. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, not much to say.
I told my wife so my birthday's in a couple days, and I think we're going to go see No Way Home for my birthday.
Yeah,
and my wife's like, am I going to get it? How much homework do I have to do before seeing this? And I'm like,
I don't know. I feel like you get more out of it. I feel like you get more out of it if you've seen all the movies, but also...
I haven't seen... I mean, I've seen the Raimi movies 1,000 times, but I've seen The Amazing Spider-Man once, and I have not seen the second Amazing Spider-Man, but I'm still looking forward to this.
I think that's more than enough, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll be fine. I'm not sure she'll be fine, but I'll definitely be fine.
You will be, yeah. Definitely.
I mean, you should watch the Sam Raimi Spider-Man just anyways.
I rewatched 2 within the last month because why not? It's just a joyous, incredible movie.
Yeah. Bonesaw is ready.
Well, that's in 1, but yes.
I thought you said you watched it 2. Like you watched...
No, I watched Spider-Man 2. But I do say, Grizz, as an American football fan, every season, without fail, if a running back... It just comes out of me, or I can't help it. It's involuntary. If a running back gets hit in the backfield, I instinctively say, "You're going nowhere!" Which is from Bonesaw McGraw in Spider-Man
I got 1. You for 3
minutes! 3 minutes of playtime. R.I.P. Randy Macho Man said.
Yeah. Yep. R.I.P. But yeah, very exciting.
Anyway,
I enjoyed Spider-Man quite a bit.
Also, next week is The Matrix. So, I've been counting time as days from The Matrix,
which is so funny because like I'm thinking about like all the stuff I have to do for Christmas here in the coming week, and then that weekend, and it's like your Christmas is literally The Matrix.
I haven't even noticed that it was Christmas. It's just like, oh, it's The Matrix, and then maybe I'll think about Christmas, maybe. Yeah.
I can just picture Hugo rewriting John Lennon's, so this is Christmas to so this is The Matrix.
I can do that. I can definitely do that. Shall we get into our film to remember?
Oh, yes.
I guess.
Yes. So this week we're talking about Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder. The movie was released in 2003. It was his second feature film. I think he has some shorts that he did before that, but it was his second feature film. First one is Barking Dogs Never Bite, movie that I haven't seen, but apparently it was like not as well received as the rest of his work. It was sort of a first feature, which is fine. It was written by Bong Joon-ho and Shing Sung-bo. By the way, we are going to mispronounce names. It is what it is. And it is loosely based on the first confirmed South Korean serial killer who, between 1986 and 1991, raped and murdered 10 women and young girls in this small rural town called Hwaseong. The town isn't named in the movie, but it is based on that story at least. The real-life serial killer, interestingly enough, was imprisoned in 1994 for another murder that wasn't done in the same small town, and it was only in 2019 that, re-examining the evidence and re-questioning him and other witnesses, that they figured out that it was actually him who had done the murders all along. So they had caught the murderer for this famous serial killer case in Korea, but they didn't even know that they had, which I thought was interesting, which, by the way, happened like a few weeks before the first time I watched this movie. So my initial review on Letterboxd is like, this is eerie, because like this happened 2 weeks ago and only now I'm seeing the movie. Really weird. The story of the film is mostly fictional. It retains the setting and the details of how the actual murders were carried out, which were taken from the case, which is a big sort of mediatic moment in Korean history. And another element that it keeps is the inconclusive DNA test plot point, which we'll discuss at the end of the podcast, I guess. The film was really well received. It received 30 awards and nominations in several Asian award ceremonies, and it is considered one of the best Korean films ever made, at least in what we call the Korean New Wave. Yes, Josh, what do you got?
It was not nominated for Best International Feature at the Oscars.
It was not.
I was just checking on that, and I checked the nominees for that year, and I have not heard of any of them, and not heard of any of the filmmakers.
What were they? What were they?
I can read them off for you. Give me 1 second. What won was a Canadian movie called The Barbarian Invasions. There's a Swedish movie called Evil from a guy named Mikael Hafström. There's a Japanese movie called The Twilight Samurai from a guy named Yoji Yamada, or a woman, I don't know. A movie from the Netherlands called Twin Sisters, and a movie from the Czech Republic called Zellery. And like I said, never heard of any of the movies, never heard of any of the filmmakers, and like I feel like there's usually one person or one movie I've heard of in any given crop of those movies.
There's usually one of those breaks out from the pack as something that breaks out beyond the international feature popularity.
And I think it's safe to say that the 2003 movie that's not in English that has broken out is this.
Yeah.
His Memories of Murder.
100%.
And keep in mind, Old Boy, which is another one of the most famous Korean movies, is also 2003. And neither of them was nominated. I feel that the popularity sprouted a few years later, I guess.
Now that we say that, though, I did look up that this Memories of Murder did not get a U.S. release until 2005, which was 2 years later. So let me double check the Oscars for 2 years later to make sure it didn't crop up there, because...
Oh, is that how it works?
Kind of.
Right.
Eligibility rules are weird. It has to play in L.A., and I assume it didn't play in L.A. 2005. Also, have not heard of any of these movies from 2 years later Academy Awards.
Yep.
So,
yeah,
was not recognized immediately by the Academy. I think it was kind of. We can talk about this in a bit, but it was kind of discovered after the fact, after Bong Joon-ho's career kind of took off. I think in terms of outside of Korea.
Mm-hmm. But generally, it is very highly regarded. Just a few examples, one fun and one more institutional, I guess. Quentin Tarantino did a list, I think he did it in 2009 or something, where he listed his favorite 20 films since he'd started working in Hollywood, so since 1992. And he listed both Memories of Murder and The Host, both by Bong Joon-ho. And Memories of Murder was also included in the Sight and Sound list of 30 key films that defined the decade. So it definitely found some of its popularity and critical acclaim at least, by the end of the decade. Maybe after Bong Joon-ho had worked on other stuff, or maybe after some just Korean cinema in general sort of started becoming more popular.
Well, also because of people, like, not to give him too much credit, but like people like Tarantino who like shout out people like this, that
absolutely.
That gets a certain type of person to pay attention, you know? Sight and Sound, same way.
Mm-hmm. It was a huge commercial success, though, in Korea at least. At the time of the end of its run, it was the fourth most viewed film of all time in South Korea, behind other movies that I haven't heard of, except for Joint Security Area, because it's by Park Chan-wook, which I had heard of. It was so successful that at the time it was credited with saving one of its production companies from bankruptcy, Sidus Pictures, which I'm sure is a Korean company that we never heard of, but interesting. The film stars Kim Sang-hyun as Detective Seo, who comes from Seoul to investigate the serial killer case that the movie is depicting, and it stars more prominently, I guess, Song Kang-ho as local detective Park, as well as Park Hae-il as one of the main suspects of the murder. Song Kang-ho is probably the most famous and recognizable Korean cinema star. He's definitely a big star in Korea, but he has become recognizable in the West as well. He was in Parasite, he was in Snowpiercer, he was in The Host by Bong Joon-ho, and he also was in a few movies by Park Chan-wook, who is, I guess, the other director from Korea who became a bit more famous in the West. So before we discuss the movie itself, I'll just give you the premise for the story, and then we'll get into our thoughts. So the story is that what happens is that a series of rapes and murders that are all similar to each other start happening in 1986 in a small unnamed town in South Korea. The local police have never dealt with anything like this, so they do seem very overwhelmed, and they make a lot of mistakes. They can't properly, isolate the crime scene. They can't get evidence properly, especially at the beginning. Conducting the investigation is Detective Park, who is a local detective. But we are also soon introduced to Detective Seo, I guess is the pronunciation, from Seoul, who personally decides to come to the small town to help with the investigation. And I guess they are the two main characters of the movie, for the most part. They initially suspect two locals, and they start, using very aggressive means of interrogation to get them to confess of them. But then eventually they find more convincing evidence of another suspect who may or may not be the murderer. We'll find out, I guess. So I'd like to start by asking you what your just general thoughts on the movie, what your history maybe with Bong Joon-ho movies is as well, and if you've seen quite a few of his movies, like where would you sort of rank this among his work? Is this one of your favorites, not one of your favorites, that kind of thing? Grizz, do you want to start?
Sure. So, as far as Bong Joon-ho goes, I've seen 3 of his movies. Memories of Murder, Parasite, and Snowpiercer. Obviously, those are all the big ones here in the West. Although, I know that he did Okja, which
Okja is pretty big too.
Also very big, and I've heard of The Host, because that was another one, but it seemed
Mother.
But it seemed like it might be a scary movie, and you guys know how I feel about that, so stay away from that. But I love Parasite and Snowpiercer and Memories of Murder. They're all excellent movies, and so I'm very fond of Bong Joon-ho, and I think what I like best is in all the movies he kind of toes that line between more so with Parasite and Memories of Murder, where it's a very dire situation and very dark, but there's still enough humor in there that to make it fun, but also he finds ways to kind of like, I say this in my review on Letterboxd, he kind of punishes the viewer for laughing at stuff by making you, by like, haha, this is so funny, and then it comes back to you later, and it's like, oh no, that was actually really, really dark and messed up, and I shouldn't have been laughing about that, because that, and he does that very, very well, so that you still have the humor, which gives you a little levity, but then also brings it back into the heart of the movie, whatever the message that they're going for, whatever kind of spirit he's trying to portray. It all comes back full circle in that. And as far as this movie in general goes, I thought it was great. I love mysteries. The biggest issue I have with mysteries is that they don't always have a lot of rewatchability. Especially if they depend. Well, I guess it depends, but depending on how the movie wraps up, can really affect how rewatchable a movie is. And I feel like this one, this only being the first time I've seen it, but I'm confident that it will have a lot of rewatchability because of how the story wraps up. But we'll talk more about that later.
And Josh, what did you think?
Just to piggyback off what you said, I rewatched the first 15 minutes of this like immediately after I finished it, and I think I haven't rewatched its entirety, but I think it's got a lot of rewatch potential based on rewatching those first 15 minutes, I think. Just like you, Grizz, I have also seen Snowpiercer and Parasite and now Memories of Murder. You didn't give a ranking, but I would put this in front of Snowpiercer and behind Parasite personally. I think this is excellent. The only reason it's behind Parasite is because Parasite's one of the best movies I've ever seen, I think. So, yeah. This is also really, really good, though, and among the best like murder mystery detective movies I've ever seen. I have a bunch of the notes I took were mostly about like interesting cuts or interesting bits of cinematography or that kind of stuff. So, like, yes, it's a murder mystery, and yes, it's engaging kind of implicitly for that reason to me, but the filmmaking is also really engaging and really entertaining and gets a lot of story across. I think it was pretty clear from Parasite that like Bong Joon-ho is one of the best to ever do it, and this is further proof that he's one of the best to ever do it. This is like really, really impressive filmmaking, and also just like entertaining, on a gut level. Even if it's not, even if the resolution isn't as satisfying as it could be, it's just a banger of a movie, man. It's really good. What's your history with Bong Joon-ho?
So, I saw Snowpiercer quite a few years ago. I mean, it was on Netflix, sci-fi movie about a train, and
it was in my Netflix queue for legitimately 5 years, and I just had always intended to. I didn't watch it till after Parasite, but like it was on my radar for a long time before Parasite.
I watched it quite a few years ago, but never really made the jump to, who made this for some reason. I kind of just watched the movie, really liked it, and never thought about it in those terms, at least. Then when Parasite was starting to come out, the success of Parasite was an interesting thing because it came out very early in the year in some circles and in festivals, and so it's the hype around it grew throughout the year. It was re-released a few times in Italy, for example. I think it came out in May, and then it was re-released at the end of the year. And by the end of the year, the local cinema where I was studying, which is essentially the Cineteca di Bologna, is the cinema that deals with a lot of repertoire cinema for the whole of Italy. Like they send prints, or they get the licenses for movies that didn't come out that year. So they do re-releases, they do restorations, that sort of stuff. And they basically re-released all of Bong Joon-ho's movies in the span of like 2-3 weeks. So I got to see in theaters, I watched Memories of Murder, I watched Mother, I watched what's the other one? Sorry, I'm blanking on the name. I watched The Host, and then I watched The Host, and then I watched Parasite. So I got to see all of these, and then I watched Oakshire on Netflix, and I never got to see Barking Dogs Never Bite, because that's weirdly hard to find, but I've basically seen all of the other ones that he's made. I love his movies. I completely agree with you guys when you say, when you talk about the comedy. I think it is kind of common to some other Korean movies that I've seen as well, but I think he is so good at blending tones that you wouldn't think would work together. The Host is another example, which is it's kind of a horror movie, kind of a social commentary, kind of a sci-fi movie, but it's also comedy, but also it's a family drama, and somehow it all works together. They have a really dark, twisted sense of humor that, as you say, Grizz, always has meaning to the story. It's not just there to be funny, and it's not just there to be shocking. It just brings meaning. And in terms of this movie specifically, I think it's neck and neck as my favorite by him with Parasite. Parasite it's everyone's favorite, and maybe it's an easy take to have, but it's just so good that's been ubiquitous. Like, it was recognized on all levels, so it makes sense.
It's hard to not call Parasite his best movie, I think, having only seen 3 myself. But I wanted to point out something though that you kind of alluded to there, is like after Parasite, his movies kind of got new life, at least in the West, and I think worldwide, really. But for example, like those theaters were playing all of his movies, and it's awesome that you went and saw those. I should have done the same thing. But I remember immediately after Parasite came out, like I was aware of Memories of Murder, and I tried to seek it out because I'd heard it was, it was probably his most praised work before Parasite. So I tried to seek it out, and like I couldn't get my hands on a copy anywhere. And it wasn't until I think a couple months after the Oscars, Neon bought it, and Neon. When I watched this on Hulu, this weekend, the Neon logo was up in front. I think Neon has a deal with Hulu or something like that. And then they also put it out on Blu-ray on Criterion. So like, good for them, good for Neon for scooping it up after Parasite, and good for Parasite that like it is making his movies more accessible. But they were less so before Parasite, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's going to be one of the, we've seen Korean movies becoming more and more popular throughout the years. We have an Old Boy, Handmaiden is another movie that you might have seen.
Great movie. Yeah, awesome.
Train to Busan. That there's a bunch of them that are really good and that have been getting more and more popularity. I think Parasite was the breakout. Even just box office wise, I think it almost made $200 million worldwide, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
By the way,
really,
I was.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was looking at the box office for Memories of Murder, and like I said, it got a release in the U.S. in 2005. It played in one theater for 3 weekends and made $15,000.
Yeah, so it was probably just Quentin Tarantino going to see it over and over again.
Worldwide, it just barely did not crack $1 million. It was like 990-something thousand. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, I would really like to see more of these not just Korean movies, but movies from all over the world. I'd like to see a bigger push from American publishing companies to put those movies out there more, because I think that a lot of Americans have it in their head that they won't like a movie if they have to have subtitles or if it has to be dubbed, but the rest of the world does it, right? And you guys see the movies and you seem to enjoy movies just fine, so I'd really like to see a push for that, because I think there's a lot of great movies that are not getting the recognition they deserve because it's perceived that the American audience won't watch it, and maybe it's true that the American audience won't, but I'd like to see a little more effort to try to convince us to give it a shot. Josh looks skeptical.
A movie directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Bradley Cooper and Cate Blanchett opened this weekend. It made
Nightmare Alley.
$5. So
I've heard it's excellent.
I don't know what chance a foreign movie that no one's ever heard of has in this box office climate. I also have heard it's excellent, but it made like $5 because it's up against Spider-Man. Everyone wants to go see Spider-Man. No one wants to see anything other than Spider-Man, apparently.
And maybe this is one of those things. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, maybe, that I don't think that, like, even before Parasite won at the Oscars, there wasn't the marketing push behind it that there was after the Oscars. And I think that if you put a little more marketing dollars behind it, then we might actually see some results. But
that's true. But then these movies have limited, but like Parasite, I think is an $11 million movie. Like it's a small production all in all, so they might just not have the latitude to push it with marketing as much as they would want to. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's good that we're able to rediscover these movies.
Thank God for us.
Yes,
yep, we're saving movies.
Yes, we are, by purchasing. Please buy Memories of Murder on Blu-ray. Okay, moving on.
That's how I watched it.
Yeah. So first thing that I wanted to ask you guys about before we get into like more into the movie specifically is that this movie has often been compared to Zodiac by David Fincher. They're both based on real life murders that happened over a span of years that were unresolved, at least until recently, in both cases, which is interesting. And, you know, the serial killer in real life was sometimes referred to as the Korean Zodiac. So there's sort of a weird connection between those movies. Do you have any thoughts on that comparison? Because I feel like they are, despite these similarities, they are so completely different.
I see some shades of Seven in this, another David Fincher serial killer movie.
Yeah.
And I also see shades of this in Zodiac. Whether it's like the rain or like, I mean, there's a famous sequence in Seven where someone holds up a gun to someone else's head in the rain and then doesn't pull the trigger, and that happens here. The color palette of that like golden field, which is in the opening and closing of this movie, and also the closing of Seven. I see all that stuff. And then like the story itself, I think is more reminiscent of Zodiac, given, like you just said, the true story nature and the resolution or lack thereof. I see it. Yeah, I mean, I totally believe that David Fincher saw this and was inspired by this when making Zodiac. And I also, even though I haven't read it specifically, I'm willing to believe, just based on what I've seen, that Bong Joon-ho is leaning on Seven as well when he made this.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I do agree with Josh that there are some, you know, pretty obvious similarities there. I think the most striking difference is in the actual reality of those serial killers, in that Zodiac was playing with the detectives, whereas that is not so much the case in Memories of Murder. I mean, for most of the movie, the serial killer is just going about their business. And the detectives are trying to locate them, and they're not
just trying to live here, man. Just trying to commit some murders. Leave me alone.
But they're not toying with each other the way in Zodiac that, you know, all those letters are to toy with everyone. But that's the most striking difference to me between those.
Which also kind of gets to like the commentary that the thesis of the movie. You know, the Zodiac killer, and therefore the movie about him, is kind of like implicitly about the media in a lot of ways, and the attention you get and that kind of thing. And this is not really about that, but it is about other stuff like how women are treated, for as an example. Also, Grizz, to your point, like the Zodiac the movie Zodiac, it was ruthlessly researched.
Yes.
And is as true to life as it can be, as long it, you know, as true as it responsibly can be. In terms of drawing conclusions. I think they spent like a year and a half researching that to get everything right. They had trees flown in to Lake Berryessa that didn't exist when they shot it, but were there in the 70s. You know, they were ruthlessly researched. And this Memories of Murder is largely fictional. Like it's about a real case,
based on,
but
yeah.
The details are mostly made up. So another difference, I guess.
I just always found that similarity interesting, because beyond the very surface level, it feels to me like the movies are trying to do very different things. Like Zodiac is almost journalistic.
It's definitely
very much,
100%.
You know?
Very much so.
And this one, on the other hand, it's sort of taking this thing that really happened, that is in sort of the shared memory of Koreans, to make a movie about something else. It's like it is about the murders, but it's also about the you know, political situation in the background of the story. It's about
paranoia.
Police
tactics.
About paranoia.
Yeah.
It's about police tactics. It's about, you know, it's trying to comment on different things, and I don't know. I always found I always found it interesting how similar the movies are, despite being so different in their aims. I don't know. I think it's interesting, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're both kind of about obsession and futility.
For sure.
But I think Zodiac is more about obsession, and this is more about futility.
I was going to say, this one feels like the investigation in Memories of Murder is like Murphy's Law, the investigation, because everything that can go wrong goes wrong.
Dude, they get so close too.
So many times.
They get so many leads, promising leads.
Yeah.
You know?
We'll get into it. So, I just wanted to just throw out a few thoughts about the movie stylistically. I think, Josh, you started talking about this, and I completely agree that the movie one of the strengths of the movie is not just that it's an interesting story, but that it has its own, first of all, tonally, it feels very unique. Like, this is, again, we talked about the comedy, but the dark sense of humor that this movie has sometimes catches you off guard, especially if you're not expecting it. You know, it's a movie about a serial killer. You're not expecting the detective to drop kick at the other detective at the beginning of the movie.
Multiple times.
Many times, yeah.
Yeah. There are many drop kicks, which is something that you wouldn't expect from this type of movie. And at the same time, I think the cinematography, and not just simply the cinematography, but the production design, the color palette, the way things are framed, it just constantly tries to create a striking image that I think keeps your attention high, even when the movie, like, there's a part in the middle of the movie where they're sort of investigating different leads and you don't really completely understand where it's going. And I think just how good it looks and how interesting it is just keeps your interest peaked at all times. I don't know if you guys feel the same.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of striking images. One that I noted was a character dies at one point and is witnessed by one of our main characters, and then like one of the first shots after his death is a shot of blood on one of our main character's hands. I'm like, good job.
Yep.
Good job, Bong. Yeah.
There's also like one that stuck with me a lot, both times that I watched it, was when they find the final suspect, who presumably is the most likely to be the murderer, and the camera just is a still shot of all the detectives looking at the interrogation light, and you don't see the suspect yet, and you just see them staring at him, and they're not speaking, and the movie just pauses there for a few seconds. Like that, I think that's the kind of stroke that shows you that you're in the hands of a filmmaker that is using the medium at its fullest, and he's not just trying to tell this story, he's trying to constantly make it stylistically interesting.
Yeah. Did you guys know what the opening shot is? It's been a minute since we've had talked about the opening shot of a movie.
I always forget to pay attention in particular to that.
Well, like I said, it's been a minute since we talked about it. The opening shot is a boy crouched in the field looking at a bug on a leaf, and he's focused on the bug, and then he is able to grab the bug, and then he stands up and the camera lifts with him, and you see how vast the field is behind him, which I thought was a kind of like a needle in a haystack kind of imagery, where he's in this big vast field where every leaf looks the same, but he is crouched down looking at one leaf and one bug on the leaf and is able to find the bug. But then like he stands up and you see, you know, if you were given the task of finding a bug in this field, how Sisyphean that would be. And I thought that's poignant given what this movie is.
Sisyphean.
Yeah, man, Sisyphean.
Yeah, that's a good pull, Josh.
I went to college. And there's like a bunch of like other stuff I clocked. There's a cut from the detectives are looking at a body on a medical examiner slab and like looking at the rotting flesh, and it cuts from that straight to meat tenderloin being dropped onto a hot plate at a Korean barbecue restaurant. I guess it's called a barbecue restaurant there. I thought that was a good cut. There's a great cut from when Song Kang-ho is talking to his, I guess, sergeant, his chief, and he says he suspects that the killer doesn't have any pubic hair, and then it immediately cuts to him in a bathhouse, like checking out all the dudes junk around him. That
was one of those really funny scenes.
Yeah, that got me. That was great. Especially because, like, it comes at a point where the other detective is explaining to the chief all his theories, and Detective Park just doesn't believe him, and he just moves his chair next to him, and he's like, pubic hair. Hairless pubic hair. That's the way to go.
Two more cinematography things for me. One is the tunnel sequence in the third act. If you've seen Brick,
I have, yes.
Rian Johnson's debut movie, he completely rips off the tunnel sequence in this movie. I mean, pays homage, not rips it off.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what he's doing. And then the last thing is like the Jonathan Demme of it all. You know, Jonathan Demme famously had a lot of close-ups of people looking directly into the camera.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And this has several of those. So, you know, that kind of gives it shades of Silence of the Lambs a little bit, I think.
And I really love those moments because, especially since I can't remember the name of the Detective Park is the local one, right?
Park, yeah.
It's frequently on Detective Park, and they set it up early in the movie that Detective Park believes that he has sort of a sixth sense that when he wants people to look into his eyes, and he can tell by looking at someone's face their guilt or innocence. So that happens a lot through the movie, where the camera is focused exclusively on his face, and it's framed beautifully. And I think that's probably one of my favorite running, themes through the film is his sixth sense and how effective it is or isn't at times.
Yeah. And I think, there is a indelible image in this movie of Song Kang-ho, like, looking directly at the camera, like, lit with the golden field behind him. Like, that's, like, one of the few still images from this movie that I'd seen before watching it. And it's funny, I think another indelible image from Bong Joon-ho's filmography is also a close-up of Song Kang-ho looking directly at the camera as he's driving a rich lady around in the late second act of Parasite. So, two of the indelible images from his filmography is just Song Kang-ho's face looking at the camera.
Can we talk about how good Song Kang-ho is? I don't know how many movies you've seen with him, but I think he's just excellent because he goes from this sort of, like, I don't know, he's this brutal policeman who tortures people, but you also kind of like him and he's funny. And also at the same time you hate him, and also then he changes and becomes a much more dramatic figure by the end of the movie.
It's a subtle thing, but he is not the one who does the torturing. He's obviously the one who sets up the torturing.
He sanctions the torturing.
So,
Yes.
but it's that subtle distinction. I think that's how they walk that line of him being likable still, is because he's never the one, and he also is very apologetic in some of the cases where he got it wrong, and like. There's a part of me that's like, dude, there's nothing you can say at this point. You tortured me for 5 days. You can't, thanks for the shoes, bro. That's not going to do anything for me now.
He's also the point of view character, though.
Exactly.
So, like, he gets a little bit, he gets some sympathy points because, like, we see him at home with his wife and that kind of stuff, and we don't see that with the other detectives. So,
and I think his overall jadedness is something that I think relates to a lot of people, and especially anyone who's been in their particular line of work for an extended period of time. You start to feel a little jaded about stuff, no matter what you're doing, even if it's something as important as police work. So I think that makes him a very relatable character as well.
Right. So yeah. Speaking of police, I think an interesting wrinkle in this movie is its setting. We've talked a lot about how it's a murder mystery and how it's similar to other films like serial killer films like Seven or Zodiac, but I feel like this movie is also very clearly trying to do some social commentary about Korea itself. It's set, just very brief research that I did, it is set in the year between 86 and 87. 87 is the year when the period of military dictatorship that had been going on for decades came to an end. So, and we can see in the background, some of the democratic protesters being, violently stopped by police officers. There's also a point in the movie where it is a plot point that they don't have enough surveillance to keep the whole town safe while it's raining, because most of the police officers are off, trying to stop a protest. So I'm interested to know if you guys agree that the movie that sort of has a lot to say politically. It is a movie about the murder mystery, but it is also a movie about police brutality. It is also a movie about the media trying to, report on the fact that everyone in this small town knows that the police are being violent with their detainees and they are not being let in, and there's this recurring journalist character that tries to interfere but they're not able to, you know what I mean, that sort of stuff. What do you guys think?
For me, there's a distinction between the political aspect and the police brutality. I think that the messaging about the police brutality is much more overt, and to me is probably the most central theme to the movie, is how bad police work and being a bad person in police work can only adds to detriment in throughout this whole thing. But there is the political overtone in the background, and I think it's a different thing. Well, maybe not a completely different thing, but it's more about the protesters is all very much background stuff, except for in that one moment where they acknowledge they don't have enough police. But the police brutality aspect of it, and is much more in your face throughout the whole movie. And I think the main connection there that you're talking about, Hugo, is how the transition from their military state to the state that they're in now, there's people who are approaching things from a standpoint of like the way they used to do things, and versus which is what they're doing in this rural town, versus what Detective Seo is bringing, which is the much more modern and proper tactical approach for police work. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, that's a good call about the kind of the contrast of the big detective from Seoul versus like these smaller town detectives. That is like a running conflict. Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head. I don't think maybe I didn't know the background of like the military presence in the protests, Hugo. I know there's like allusions to it in the movie, but I didn't parse it out.
Yeah, I think it's quite subtle and it's not very clear for an audience that isn't Korean. But if you do a little bit of research in the movie, the Korean film industry sort of restarted in the 90s after the dictatorship. It was before there was so much censorship that they were basically not allowed to do anything that wasn't approved by the state. And so Bong Joon-ho, being one of the prominent directors of the new wave, as it's called, of Korean cinema, I guess is playing with sort of shared memories that Koreans have, both of the murders and of the political situation at the time. And I know it's one of the big things that made this movie connect with a Korean audience that knows that history. And so it might be something that doesn't translate maybe for a more international audience as much, but I think it's a big part of the movie.
Yeah, hearing that context certainly, changes things a little bit. I mean, as you guys both kind of alluded, it kind of becomes a movie about, limited resources. And because that's going on in the country, like, what is the cost of that? And the cost of that is, multiple murders that may have been able to be prevented had they had the manpower to, follow up on the clues that they had. Instead, they were relying on these three guys, and, they were flawed guys and weren't able to prevent several of these murders that happened after they kind of already knew a profile of the killer and could have maybe found him.
Another, I think, element of commentary, you alluded to this as well, Josh, is certainly sexism. I think it's very interesting that the movie is about rapes and murders of young women, and it is being investigated by people who often are dismissive of women, who don't take their opinions seriously. I guess Detective Seo brings the sort of the counterpart to that, because he does listen more. But they are very dismissive. They talk about women in a very sexual way. Even the girl that is being used sort of as bait for this serial killer, they say, "Oh, she looks so sexy in this outfit that we put on her," and that kind of thing. And there's certainly a lot of commentary there as well. Yeah.
And it is worth pointing out that one of the biggest breaks in the case was not made by any of the detectives, but by actually she might have been a detective. I don't know if they ever.
Well, it's like a secretary situation.
Yeah,
no, they call her officer. They call her officer, which is interesting. Like she is operating as a secretary because she's a woman, and I guess that's the role that they sort of reserve for her. But they do call her Officer Kwon. So
yeah, but that she makes one of the most substantial breaks in the case, and it's like you alluded to, Detective Seo is the one that is like, no, let's hear what she's talking about here.
Yeah,
let's follow through on this, and so that is definitely another big part of the commentary that Bong Joon-ho's going for here.
And Detective Park is too concentrated on pubic hair at that point.
Yeah, on looking at men's junk to worry about how to stop these women from being killed. And I think that speaks further to like the resources thing that I kind of was talking about is, does the lack of resources put in this case speak to how people feel about the fact that the victims are, quote unquote, only women. Does that speak to a priority that these people have? And I also think it's interesting that the first first hour 20 maybe is we don't hear from many women at all, save for the officer in the office. But the movie takes a bit of a tonal shift when they locate a would-be victim. I think she was actually raped, but she wasn't murdered.
They locate a survivor.
A survivor.
She said, "I just kept my eyes closed so he wouldn't murder me."
Right.
And she also says this happened in September, so she would have been the first person who was attacked.
The first rape victim, first would-be murder victim. And her recounting what happened to her, again, big tonal shift in the movie that the movie kind of doesn't ever return from. It kind of stays in that dark realm, but it's interesting that when it's men trying to solve this crime happening to women, it's kind of like a jocular is the wrong word, but kind of like a lighter, funnier,
they're not taking it as
tone.
seriously as they ought to.
And then the second we hear from a woman, the darkness of what's going on and the severity of this really hits you, and it stays that way. And I think that's poignant.
It's definitely intentional because first hour or so of the movie, the tone is quite different from the second half. And there's that scene where they find this guy who's just like a local pervert who's jerking off where the person was killed, and it's sort of played for comedy. It isn't necessarily taken as seriously, and even the torturing of innocents in some ways is kind of played for comedy until in the back half it becomes serious, because now the police are under scrutiny, and now the person who was doing the violence is gets sent home. And I agree. I never noticed that the tonal shift happens exactly at that point, but it's a very interesting observation.
Yeah, and that's where for me that's where I'm talking about where Bong Joon-ho is punishing you for laughing at that stuff earlier. Hey, look, see, while you were laughing at this, you weren't paying attention to how this has completely screwed up their investigation, how it's led to additional victims and all that stuff, and and then the people who were bad actors get some comeuppance. The jump kicking detective,
loses a leg because he got into a brawl.
Because he got into a pointless brawl, because he can't stop torturing the people he's interrogating.
And I think it's also, when they bring in, Officer Kwon to sort of get this woman's statement, I think it's the first time that we actually see the rape being done. I think it's the first time we see a woman being gagged while she's alive. Because the rest of the movie, we see corpses, we see them in the morgue, but it's not as in your face with the violence of it, I guess, as this movie could have been. Especially in the first half, you know what I mean? I think that's the first time.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you can kind of disassociate from yourself. This is something that happened to this, body on a slab, not, but, seeing it actually happen in the movie puts you into that situation more, from an empathy standpoint. And to Grizz's point, I think it's critical of the attitudes in the first hour of the movie towards the victims, and it puts you more in their shoes moving forward. And there's also a sequence that I think happens before the rape recounting is we see a woman attacked.
Yeah.
Right?
We do see that. Before.
And man, that's also a big tonal shift of people talk about Zodiac and how, Hugo, like you said, it's very journalistic and it's parts of it are very brightly lit, and it's not jocular, but, lighter in tone. And then there's what people refer to as the basement scene in Zodiac, where it suddenly becomes a horror movie. And that's exactly what happens here. It's the movie's kind of lighter when you're with the detectives because they don't take it as seriously as they should. And then we follow this woman walking home in the rain, and holy shit, that's a scary scene. And it's tough. Yeah.
But even then, I think we only see a blur of
which makes it worse.
Of this character attacking her, and
yeah,
it shows you, it gives you the sense of
seeing
dread.
him in the grass in the background there.
It was really scary. And it's
see him come out of the grass.
Yeah,
I think it's very smart that right after that, it doesn't go into a scene where we see the actual violence, because it just gives you the impression of the fear. And then only later you see, the violence being done. So yeah. God, this movie's so good, isn't it?
It really is very good.
It's really, really
and
good.
It's another one of those movies that I feel like gets better the more you talk about it.
Yeah, for sure.
On that note, can I just talk about one thing? Can I talk about the stuff I noticed on my 15-minute rewatch real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go for it.
So the opening scene, or the opening image rather, like that struck me on first watch, like the again, to use the word Sisyphean task of finding a needle in a haystack kind of thing. But then just through the opening credits, how much Detective Park is undermined at every turn. He's in that very opening scene when he's inspecting the body, he's mocked by this little kid, the kid who's the opening image. He's mocked by him. And then he's typing, interviewing a suspect, and he can't get his typewriter to reset, and the suspect has to hit the typewriter button for him. Yeah, help him. And then he's not given a receipt for his takeout order. And then at the scene of a second murder, he has a footprint of the killer and then it's driven over by a tractor. He's undermined 5 times in the first 8 or 10 minutes.
And that same one with the tractor, when they go out into the field, they're maybe that's not the same one, but the other officers are in the field and they're reenacting again, that's played for comedy in that scene, and it's complete buffoonery.
And multiple people fall down the hill trying to get down to the crime scene area, and it's actually all done in one impressive long take where the shot opens with someone falling down the hill, then it circles around for a couple minutes, then returns to the same spot, and someone else falls down the hill a second time. Yeah, it is buffoonery. Yeah, it's good stuff. I didn't pick up on all of that on first watch, but once I kind of got the tone and what this character is and what he goes through and the frustration associated with it, that's all there in the opening scenes. His frustration's all there, Yeah,
and it's I was talking about earlier how jaded he is. It's you get the feeling from these scenes that this happens every time he has to work with anybody else. It's just nonsense, and so he becomes less and less caring about the events going on around him as a result of this. And then you have Detective Seo come in, who is used to a higher standard and is not jaded, and you get to his arc in the movie is you see this comedy of errors in the investigation slowly begin to break him of his good nature. It's really
his good
great
nature, but also his attachment to his belief in procedure. He says several times throughout the movie, documents never lie. Yeah. And then in the climax, he said, this document is a lie. Which shows you how this investigation sort of destroyed that person and turned him into somebody else.
And
almost
turns him into a detective, not unlike Detective Park. And that's, what makes this movie so great to me is how we have all of these different threads that are, obviously they're all related, but they are given just the right amount of importance in the movie that there's something special about all of it. And you can focus on any one of these threads and watch it from beginning to end. And it's just, I just think it's very powerful and so well done that no aspect of this story gets dropped partway through. He carries it all the way through in all the threads, which is brilliant.
He's a great writer, man.
Yeah, fantastic.
The screenplay of Parasite is insanely good, and every detail comes back into play. And same thing here. There's not an ounce of fat. Everything matters and pays off. I feel like
it's not unlike Chinatown, which we've talked about previously, where every little thing that is set up it carries all the way through. The writing is, I think, is my favorite part of this movie.
Shall we get into sort of the conclusion, how the story goes, and then we can discuss the...
I'll go ahead and throw up a spoiler on this part.
So, as we said, they investigate some local people. They sort of try to torture them in order for them to confess, but it doesn't really, work out. It doesn't stick, because Detective Seo finds another detail that doesn't fit for that character. One time it's the hands, one other time... It's both times the hands, but for different reasons, I suppose. we slowly find out about how the murderer sort of operates. We find out that he always works in the rain. I don't know if the rain is just part of the modus operandi of this person, or if it's just because he knows that there won't be as much evidence if he does it in the rain. He always attacks women who are wearing red, or at least have some red detail on them. Or I think I said it because I'm thinking of the rucksack of one of the girls that he attacks that we see that has like a tiny little pin that is red, and that's enough for this murderer. We slowly find out that he leaves things behind without going into too much gruesome details. And Kwang Ho, who's this just poor bystander who's unfortunately mentally challenged, turns out to be a key witness at the end of the movie. But again, so they find out that this Park Hyun-gyu is the most likely suspect of the murder, but sort of the evidence isn't strong enough despite their strong feeling that he's the one that did it. The last piece of evidence is this drop of semen that is found in some of the clothes in one of the crime scenes. But, as was the case in real life, even though in real life they sent it to Japan and not the US, Korea didn't have the machinery at the time to sort of try to match the suspect's DNA to the DNA that was found on the scene, so it sent to the US. And in the meantime, they tried to put this ban under surveillance, but as we said, only 3 people basically are actually operating on this particular investigation, because all the other cops are off beating up democratic protesters. And so one night, Detective Seo dozes off and he loses Park, who is the suspect.
He'd been tailing him, yeah.
Because he'd been tailing him, and in the same night there is another murder. This final murder is of a young girl who we've seen throughout the movie and who has interacted with Seo specifically, and she answered some question and he put a band-aid on her because she'd got hurt, and sort of they had this tiny little moment of character building together. And this sort of pushes him over the edge, and he goes to find the suspect, violently brings him in that, train tunnel that we were mentioning before, and essentially beats him up and threatens to kill him if he doesn't confess to the murder.
Which is, again, the same sort of tactic that...
Which is the same sort of tactic that the other detective was using. And at that point, we see Park coming in with the document that is going to prove whether this person did it or not. And we read in the document that it is inconclusive. Either there wasn't enough DNA, or it wasn't. The document says it is unclear whether it can't be with beyond a shadow of the doubt determined that the DNA is a match. And so at this point we get, I think, the completion of both the character arcs of these characters, because Seo is at this point so enraged and he's going to kill this man anyway, and Park, on the other hand, is the one that actually lets him go. He does the thing where he looks at him and he asks him, "Did you do it? Look me in the eyes. Did you do it?" And he doesn't believe his own intuition anymore, which is, different from what he'd done up until then. I think this final little set piece that they do is just brilliant filmmaking.
Yeah, really is.
Just in every way, just the frames, the just the beautiful rain that comes down that makes the blood drip down, and it just gives it a striking visual style. And just the actions that these characters are doing just show us how different they are from what they were at the beginning. The fact that Seo says, as I mentioned before, this document is a lie, is because at this point he's so broken by this investigation that he wants to believe that this man did it. And so, how do you guys feel about the conclusion? And what do you think? Do you think he did it? Or do you think he didn't do it? Because the movie essentially leaves it unresolved, even though it does seem like it's him.
This is awesome. Yeah. This part's awesome. I also want to shout out the tunnel imagery of following someone into the darkness and where that could lead. Really, really good imagery there, and also kind of to say it's mirroring the opening is maybe a bit disingenuous, but they do find the first body in a sewage drain situation that kind of is tunnel-like. At least they are kind of visually equating that first body and then like this final set piece. I don't think he did it because that seems like it would not be in keeping with the frustrations that the detectives have. Like if he actually did it, that kind of like somewhat justifies Detective CO, and I don't think that's what the movie's going for personally. But yeah, I mean, to your point, like the visuals in this are so striking and the emotions are so heightened, and like I'm picturing, you know, Song Kang-ho looking at the camera, but I'm also picturing the suspect looking at the camera with blood on his face, like with the gun in his face too. It's just really great stuff.
I think for me, I didn't. At first, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to get to find out who actually was the killer. Like I, you know, that was my initial reaction. But then, as the credits were rolling, I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? This is actually kind of a beautiful way to end it, because the whole movie is about the futility of this whole situation, right? And that, like we talked about, everything that could go wrong goes wrong at one point or another in the movie, and so leaving you, the viewer, now feeling just as, you know, futile as the detectives, that you don't know, you don't get to know, and you got to go live the rest of your life not knowing for sure. And so you end up with the exact same emotional reaction that the detectives are feeling in that moment. So, you know, my initial reaction was I wanted to know, and I was like, oh, come on, guys. Who's the bad guy? Tell me who the bad guy is. But then I thought about it more, and I think I kind of got what the actual message that he was going for with that ending. And I really like that now.
To me, it's, I guess, emotionally, I kind of wanted to be him in some ways. I think the movie got me in that way. It, you know, the interview scene shows this very cold, calculating person, but at the same time, I think the movie is trying to make you feel that way. And the fact that is unresolved makes you feel the frustration that the detectives themselves, as you were saying, Grizz, feel. And so that, I think that's the brilliance of it, that if we found out, it just wouldn't be as meaningful. So how do you guys feel about the epilogue instead? So we go back to Park years later. He's changed jobs, as his partner had suggested earlier in the movie. Maybe you don't have to do this. Why do you have to put yourself through this? And he doesn't do that anymore. He's some sort of salesman, and he's driving somewhere and speaking on the phone, and he asks the driver to stop because he realizes he's in the same field and in that same little tunnel and ditch that you were mentioning, Josh, where the first victim was found. And we see the image of him crouching down and looking into this hole that I think matches the one that we saw at the beginning of the movie. The color palette is completely different.
Yes.
And
he's having the titular memories of murder.
He's having the titular memories of murder. He's remembering the murders. On which we talk about on Remember the Film. There's a lot of memory.
Well, a lot of memory happening here.
Lots of memory. Yeah. And a little girl walks past and asks him what he's doing, and she says, "Oh, it's really weird. Another person came here." And we are left to presume that this is the killer. And Park almost instinctively asks this girl, what did he look like? And she says, oh, he just looked normal, a very plain face. Ordinary face.
She says ordinary, yeah.
Yeah, which is, you know, either wanting to tell you, oh, yeah, you know that guy who we thought might have been the murderer? He did look quite ordinary. His face was quite plain. But I think it's more of a commentary of just how ordinary people can be driven to do such horrific things. And then the movie cuts back to him asking what he looked like, and I think the last image we see is his face just staring into the camera, and there's a little tear just coming to his eyes. Well, and the movie ends.
To read into the cinematic language here, at least my take is when she tells him that he looked ordinary, to me, that particularly because he's in the field that we opened in. And again, to use the opening image as like the needle in the haystack imagery, the fact he's in this field and here's the killer had an ordinary face, it kind of tells me it could have been anybody. And like this was an impossible task, that there's nothing distinct about him. And to your point, Hugo, it's just like a guy out there, an ordinary person, that kind of a unsettling notion that, you know, an ordinary person could rape and murder these 5 women, I think. But then, you know, to again read the cinematic language of the closing shot, he turns and looks at the camera, and we know that this character thinks that he has the ability to read people by looking in their eyes, and he is looking in our eyes, the audience's eyes, by looking directly in the camera, as if to interrogate us, like, are you the ordinary people are you the ordinary person that I'm looking for that did this horrific thing? You know, it's is the person sitting next to you an ordinary person that could have done this horrific thing? It's really good and really effective, and I really, really love the closing image in the epilogue. It's good stuff. Good button.
Well, and for me, that epilogue was one final gut punch regarding the futile nature of this whole investigation, is that all this time has passed, and he gets this one more glimmer of hope. Oh my gosh, the killer, maybe that could have been the killer that was here. What can you tell me about him? And then they get the most vague description that you could possibly give, that someone looks ordinary. And it's like, oh man, you got me again, Bong, with that little glimmer of hope. You got me. Director Bong got me good
fantastic.
with that.
And I also really love that the color palette is so bright in this ending, because it's almost as if, he got out of that job, like that role that he had was making the world grey. And in some ways, despite the fact that he'll never get over the trauma that he went through, still the world is a brighter place because he doesn't have to deal with that stuff anymore. Yeah. I think it's just a great ending. Both the final showdown at the train tunnel and this epilogue just elevate the movie past what it already was, which is already great.
Good movie.
Yeah. Do you want to rank this? If you have any final thoughts, go ahead. But otherwise,
we can try to rank it, I guess.
It's hard. It's very hard.
It is hard. I'll go first. I think that I will put this. I will put this after Scream ahead of John Wick. So I'm putting it at 17. I can read off the first 16, but this, after Scream, before John Wick. So it's Chinatown, Your Name, Wind Rises, Scream. That's where I'm putting it, and then John Wick, Network, Sound of Metal. Tough to put this in front of a Network, but whatever.
Don't worry, we'll get to our re-rank here in a few more episodes, and we'll fix it again, gang. But for me, and I've given this a lot of thought, and obviously there are movies that on our list that I like better than this that are going to end up ranked lower, but I think this is a deserving spot for it on our list, and so I'm going to put it at number 9, just after Larry of Arabia, and above Mulholland Drive is where I would put it.
Cool.
Damn. Okay. I find it really hard because if you start from the top, I could put this at number 1. If you start from the bottom, I would have a hard time saying I put this ahead of Mulholland Drive because it's one of my favorite movies, and ahead of Shaun of the Dead. I would also have trouble, but with that in mind, I think I'll compromise and maybe put it ahead of. God, it's so difficult. I'm actually gonna go just below Shaun of the Dead, above Boogie Nights.
So number 6.
At number 6, yeah.
I mean, I could probably defensively put this in the top 10, but I'm not gonna overthink it. I'm just gonna leave it where I have it right now.
Like, I almost want to put it at number 1 just to push it higher, but I'm not going to do that because that's disingenuous. But
hold on, let me do some math real quick. So you have it at 6.
Yeah.
Grizz has it at 9. Josh has it at 17. Divided by 3 puts it 11.
Ooh, there we go.
So it goes behind the thing, ahead of Citizen Kane. Is that right?
Ahead of Citizen Kane, yeah.
Saying.
So I'll read off. At number 1, we have Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Number 2, Doctor Strangelove. Number 3, The Silence of the Lambs. Number 4, Paddington 2. Number 5, Shaun of the Dead. Number 6, Boogie Nights. Number 7, The Departed. Number 8, Lawrence of Arabia. Number 9, Mulholland Drive. Number 10, The Thing. And number 11, Memories of Murder. Just ahead of Citizen Kane on our list. So what are you going to do next week?
So it is my turn to pick. And I really hope that anyone who is listening to this episode or watching it on YouTube, I really want you to watch this movie so that you can participate, because it's niche. It's not something that everyone's going to have heard of, but it's called ANDHADHUN. I looked up the correct pronunciation, and I think I got close to it. It's an Indian film about a blind piano player who is a witness to a crime, and it is very unexpected. And I really, really love this movie. I watched it. I can't remember if it was earlier this year or end of last year for the first time. I absolutely loved it, and I've been kind of itching to watch it again. So that's why it's my pick for our next film to remember.
Fair enough. We're keeping it foreign.
Spelt ANDHADHUN.
It's spelled, to the English listeners, it's spelled ANDHADHUN, all one word.
Yeah.
ANDHADHUN. ANDHADHUN. Cool, man.
All right, guys, we did it. We remembered the murders this week, I guess.
We remembered the murders.
That should have been your intro. You should have done a pun on memories.
I know, yeah. I thought about it an hour and 10 minutes into the podcast. He was so hung up on
not speaking Korean.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, I don't speak Korean.
Even though his resume says that he does speak Korean.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yep. It also says he speaks whatever language they're speaking in next week's movie. But
I don't think you actually speak Italian.
Hugo's a notorious liar. I don't know. The way he said baloney theater earlier, that was something.
What did I say? What? Oh, yeah. Cineteca di Bologna.
That's
Cineteca di Bologna. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Grizz, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on, basically everywhere as @GoodGameGrizz, Twitch, and if you can follow me on here, I'd really appreciate it. And on Twitter, I'd love that. But also, I've been writing a lot of reviews on letterboxd, kind of following Hugo's lead on that. And so if you would follow me on letterboxd, it's also @GoodGameGrizz on there.
And Josh?
I'm on Twitter @TheSloopJoshB. I'm on YouTube @Movies I Love, So Can You. Gonna start working on my Oscar stuff soon, so stay tuned.
And you can find me Hugo Pinay on Twitter. Hugo_Pinay on Twitter, where I will not be talking about anything until I've seen The Matrix Resurrection twice, because I'm basically on media blackout from here on out. I don't want to know anything. Yeah, my girlfriend here, and she sighed loudly because she's been hearing a lot of Matrix talk, and I apologize to her in advance. So yeah. Find me there. Find me at Hugo Pinay on letterboxd, and follow RTF_pod on Twitter, and listen to the podcast. Bye.
Bye, everybody.